The Dakota wind in 1884 didn't just howl, it screamed. And for Isaac Prescott, it was screaming his name, dragging the memory of his wife and son out from the shallow grave he'd dug for them in his mind. For 2 years, that wind was the only voice he heard. It was a constant reminder of the silence in his cabin, a silence so thick he could feel it pressing in on him, stealing the very air from his lungs. His ranch was just a speck of defiance against a sky that didn't care. He'd built it with his own hands, for a woman named Mary, for a future that had turned to dust. Now, his life was nothing but a routine. A wall he built, brick by brick, to keep the grief out. Wake before the sun, mend the fences, chop the wood. Every swing of the axe, every hammer blow, was a word he couldn't say. He worked until his muscles burned and his mind went blessedly blank. But forgetting was a luxury the prairie didn't allow. Grief was a phantom that sat across from him at his empty table. It was the echo in the bedroom, where a cradle he'd sanded with his own hands stood vacant, a monument to a life that never began. 2 years. 2 years since he'd put Mary and their boy in the ground on the same damn day. The man he used to be, the one with the easy laugh and the sky-blue eyes full of dreams, was buried with them. All that was left was this hollow shell, a man made of splinters and silence. He expected nothing. He wanted nothing. The harshness of the land was a strange comfort. It didn't lie to you. It didn't offer you false hope. It just was. And in its vast, brutal emptiness, he saw a reflection of himself. Then, one morning in late October, the world decided to break. A cold front, sharp and sudden as a knife in the back, crashed down from the north. It brought a wet, heavy snow weeks too early. This wasn't the gentle snow of winter. This was a killer, the kind that could bury a man alive and wipe his existence from the earth. A knot of pure dread tightened in Isaac's gut. He had a fence line miles to the west, a treacherous stretch of rock where his cattle could get trapped. He couldn't leave it to chance. The routine was all he had left. He saddled his horse, Old Bill, and rode out into the swirling white chaos. It was a fool's errand. He knew it, but sitting still was worse. For hours, he was just a ghost in a blizzard, the world shrinking to the space between his horse's ears. He was getting close to the rocks when Old Bill suddenly shied, snorting in alarm. The horse never spooked. Isaac reined him in, his hand dropping to the rifle on his saddle. He squinted into the blinding snow, his heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. At first it looked like a wounded animal, a dark heap at the base of the rocks, already half swallowed by the drifts. He swung down from the saddle, his boots sinking deep. As he got closer, the shape came into focus. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a woman, wrapped in hides, her black hair caked with ice and snow. She was collapsed, her body curled into a fragile shield, protecting something beneath her. Then he saw it. A tiny flicker of movement. He broke into a run, the snow sucking at his legs. He fell to his knees beside her, the cold biting through his trousers. The woman's face was ashen, her lips blue. She was Lakota, but she was miles from any known camp. As he reached for her, a low moan escaped her lips, a sound of such pure agony it stole his breath. And that's when he saw what she was hiding. Tucked into the curve of her body, wrapped in rabbit fur, were 2 infants. 2 impossibly small babies, their faces pale and still. They weren't moving, they weren't crying. A dread colder than the storm itself pierced Isaac's soul. He'd seen death. He knew its stillness. He reached out a trembling finger and touched one tiny cheek. It was colder than the snow. For a long second, he was frozen, rooted to the spot by the sheer crushing tragedy of it all. The prairie was taking them. It took everything, sooner or later. The old Isaac, the man he was before, would have seen this as God's cruel will. The man he was now, the man of stone and silence, felt a powerful urge to just turn around, to get on his horse, ride back to his empty cabin, and let the storm finish its work. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't his grief to carry. But then he looked at the woman's face. He saw the fierce, primal instinct that made her curl her freezing body around her children even in unconsciousness. And in that moment, he didn't see a stranger. He didn't see an Indian. He saw a mother. The image was a blade that sliced through 2 years of scar tissue and struck the raw wound beneath. He saw Mary's face, pale and exhausted. He saw the still, perfect form of his own son. A strangled cry tore from his own throat, a curse hurled at the wind and the sky. He couldn't leave them. He couldn't be the man who rides away. That man, at least, wasn't dead yet. A desperate energy surged through him. He gently worked the infants free from their mother's arms. They were terrifyingly light. He ripped open his heavy sheepskin coat, exposing his chest to the biting wind. He placed the 2 tiny bundles against his own skin, praying his warmth was enough, and buttoned his coat over them. Then he turned to the woman. She was a dead weight, but adrenaline was afire in his veins. He heaved her over his shoulder and began the long walk back. The journey home was a nightmare. The wind tore at him, trying to rip the life from his body. The woman's weight was a crushing burden. The fragile stillness of the babies against his chest was a constant, terrifying accusation. He started talking, his voice a rough growl against the storm. "Hold on," he muttered, the words stolen by the gale. "Just hold on." He was talking to the woman, to the babies, to the ghost of his wife. It was a prayer. It was a promise. When he finally stumbled into his own yard, half blind, he wasn't sure if any of them were still alive. He dragged the woman inside and laid her on the rug before the hearth. He couldn't make it to the bed. He unbuttoned his coat and gently, so gently, laid the 2 infants on his cot. Their silence screamed at him. He worked like a man possessed. He built a fire, the flames roaring to life, pushing back the deathly chill. He stripped the woman of her frozen hides, his movements rough but efficient. She was thin, but she was breathing. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Then he turned to the babies. His big, calloused hands shook as he unwrapped them. A boy and a girl, twins. So small they looked like they could break. Their skin was cold and mottled, but as the heat of the cabin soaked into them, he saw a faint blush of color return. He found an old flannel shirt of Mary's tucked away in a chest. The scent of lavender and cedar hit him like a physical blow. He tore the soft fabric into strips, his vision blurring, and began to rub their tiny limbs, trying to force life back into them. He worked for hours, his world shrinking to that single desperate task. He heated milk, thinned it with water, just like the doctor had told him to do for his own son. He dipped a rag in the warm liquid and squeezed a few drops into the boy's mouth. The baby sputtered, coughed, and then, miraculously, began to suckle. A cry, thin and reedy as a bird's call, shattered the silence. It was the most beautiful sound Isaac had ever heard. He did the same for the girl. Her cry joined her brother's. The cabin, his tomb, was suddenly, shockingly, filled with the sound of life. Isaac sank back on his heels, a wave of relief so powerful it almost broke him. They were alive. He looked over at their mother. Her eyes fluttered open. Dark, deep eyes, filled with a wild animal panic. Her gaze darted around the strange room, landed on him, a white man, and then on her children. A look of pure terror washed over her face. "Easy now," Isaac said, his voice low. "You're safe. Your children are safe." Her eyes narrowed, filled with a suspicion as cold as the storm. She didn't trust him. He didn't blame her. He just watched her, a silent guardian, as the fire crackled and the twins cried. In the flickering light, he decided to clean their faces properly. He took a damp cloth and gently wiped the boy's face. The baby blinked, his tiny fists uncurling, and Isaac Prescott's world stopped turning. Staring back at him, wide and impossibly clear in that tiny, wrinkled face, were two eyes the color of a summer sky. They were a startling, piercing blue, the exact shade of blue as his own, the exact shade of blue as his lost Mary's. He felt the air leave his body. It was impossible. He scrambled to the girl. He wiped her face. Her eyes, too, were the same brilliant, shocking blue. He stared at the blue-eyed infants, then at their dark-haired, dark-eyed mother by the fire, and the silence in his heart shattered into a million questions. The first days were a standoff. The woman, whose name he still didn't know, recovered slowly. She slept by the fire, but when she was awake, her eyes never left him. It was the look of a cornered wolf, weary and sharp, expecting the killing blow. Isaac got it. In her world, a man who looked like him was a threat. Kindness was just a different kind of trap. So he kept his distance. He moved slow. He spoke only when he had to. "Broth's on the stove," he'd say, leaving a bowl near her. He was just the man who provided the wood and the warmth. She was the queen of her small island of blankets by the fire, and he was not to cross into her territory. But the twins. Caring for the twins changed everything. His rough, clumsy hands, used to axes and leather reins, fumbled with the tiny bundles. He felt like a giant, trying not to crush a pair of sparrows. But their needs were simple, and they were total. They forced him out of the prison of his own grief. You can't drown in memories when a baby is screaming for milk. Those blue eyes were a constant shock to his system. Every time he looked at them, he saw a ghost of Mary. It was a pain so sharp it felt fresh, but it was a pain that reminded him he could still feel something. He started talking to them, low murmurs while he worked. "There now, little fella," he'd whisper to the boy. It was a one-way conversation with the past, with the life he was supposed to have, and it was slowly prying open the doors he had nailed shut in his own heart. After 4 days, the woman sat up. She was still weak, but there was a new strength in her eyes. She watched him try to change the boy who was wailing his head off. Without a word, she stood up, swaying on her feet, and walked over to the cot. She held out her hands. Isaac paused for just a second, then carefully handed her the crying baby. The moment he was in her arms, the boy went silent. She held him with a natural, effortless confidence that made Isaac feel like a fool. She murmured something in her own language, a soft, flowing sound like water running over stones. It was the first time he'd heard her voice. From that moment on, the roles in the cabin shifted. She was their mother. She took over their care. A silent treaty was signed between them. He would be the provider. She would be the nurturer. The cabin was no longer just his. It had 2 separate countries inside its 4 walls. His was the cold world of iron and wood. Hers was the warm world of flesh and hearth. The silence between them began to change, too. It wasn't hostile anymore. It was just quiet. A shared space. They ate their meals without speaking. The only sounds, the clink of their spoons and the soft gurgles of the babies. He found himself watching her. The way she moved, the fierce love in her eyes when she looked at her children. He saw a strength in her that humbled him, a resilience that had been forged in a fire he couldn't even imagine. One night, the wind was screaming, rattling the windows like a trapped animal. The boy started to cry, a high, thin wail of distress. His little body was hot to the touch. Isaac felt a familiar, cold fear grip him. He saw his own son, flushed with the fever that had stolen him away. The woman looked at him, her face a mask of panic. In that moment, the lines between them vanished. They weren't a white man and an Indian woman. They were just 2 parents, terrified of losing their child. All night, they were a team. He kept the fire roaring. She held the baby, sponging his hot skin, murmuring to him in her soft language. They moved around each other in a silent, perfect dance, united against the ghost of death that lingered in the room. Just before dawn, the fever broke. The boy's breathing eased. The woman sagged with relief, her head bowed. Isaac brought her a mug of coffee, hot and sweet. She took it, and her fingers brushed against his. It was the first time they had touched. Her eyes met his over the rim of the mug, and for the first time, the suspicion was gone. In its place was something new, gratitude, understanding. "He is strong," Isaac said, his voice rough. She nodded, then after a long moment, she spoke. "Winona." Isaac blinked, confused. "My name," she said, looking right at him. "It is Winona." It was a bridge, a peace offering across the chasm that had separated them. "Isaac," he replied, the name feeling strange on his tongue. "My name is Isaac." That night, the world shifted. The next evening, she told him everything. Her English was broken, but her story was sharp enough to cut. She told him why she was out in that storm. She had been cast out by her people. Giving birth to twins was sometimes a blessing, but sometimes it was seen as an unnatural omen. But giving birth to twins with the pale skin and sky-colored eyes of the white man? That was a curse, an undeniable stain on the bloodline. "My grandmother's mother," she said, her voice low and full of shame. "She was taken in a raid, a white woman." She explained that an old legend said this white blood was sleeping in their family and that one day it would awaken. Her people, driven by fear and tradition, saw the babies as proof that the legend was a curse. A rival warrior, a man who had wanted her for himself, had used their fear against her. He had convinced the elders that she and her children would bring ruin upon them all. They hadn't killed her. They had done something crueler. They had abandoned her to the prairie, leaving her and her unnatural babies to the judgment of the spirits. Isaac listened, and a cold, hard anger built in his gut. He looked at the perfect, sleeping infants. A curse? They were a miracle. "They were wrong," he said, his voice like stone. Winona just looked at him, her expression unreadable. "It is their way." But he saw the wound in her eyes, the pain of being cast out by everyone she had ever known. He saw her loneliness, and it was a perfect mirror of his own. They were two ghosts, adrift in a world that had no place for them, who had somehow found a safe harbor in this tiny cabin, in the middle of a killer storm. The cabin was no longer a tomb. It was loud and messy and alive. The rigid routines Isaac had used to keep his grief locked away were shattered, replaced by a new rhythm set by the cries and demands of the twins. He even found himself smiling, a rusty, unfamiliar feeling. He'd watch Winona sing to the babies, her voice weaving ancient stories, and a warmth would spread through his chest that he thought he'd lost forever. He started talking to her, not just about chores, but about the ranch, about his dreams. He never mentioned Mary. That door was still locked tight. But Winona never pushed. She just listened, and he felt like she understood the things he couldn't say. One afternoon, she was mending his shirt with small, neat stitches. "You are a good man, Isaac Prescott," she said, just like that. The words hit him harder than a punch. He grunted, embarrassed, and went back to his work. But he couldn't shake them. A good man. He hadn't thought of himself as anything but a survivor for 2 long years. But as he looked at the scene in his cabin, the fire crackling, the babies sleeping, this quiet, strong woman mending his clothes, he wondered. Maybe this strange little family, born from a blizzard, wasn't just saving him from loneliness. Maybe it was saving his soul. The deep winter came and locked them in. Snow piled up in massive drifts, erasing the world outside. For Isaac and Winona, the isolation wasn't a prison, it was a sanctuary. The cabin became their entire universe, a warm bubble of life against the howling void. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, a partnership that didn't need words. He chopped the wood, she cooked the meals. He'd come in from the cold, covered in snow, and the smell of stew and the soft sounds of the babies would greet him, thawing him from the inside out. Winona would look up and give him a small, quiet smile, and it was more than enough. She named the twins. The boy was Chayton, the Lakota word for falcon, because of his fierce, watchful eyes. The girl was Wiyawi, meaning dancer, for the way her little legs were always kicking. Isaac started using the names, the strange syllables feeling more natural on his tongue each day. Chayton and Wiyawi. They weren't just the babies anymore. They were people. One evening, the cabin was peaceful. Isaac was carving a small bird for Wiyawi. Winona was humming a lullaby to Chayton. The quiet contentment was so perfect it felt fragile, like it could shatter at any moment. And in that quiet, Isaac finally found the key to the door he'd kept locked for 2 years. "My wife," he began, his voice rough, startling them both. Her name was Mary. Winona went still. She just watched him, her eyes patient, waiting. "She had eyes like theirs," he said, gesturing with the wooden bird towards the sleeping twins. "The same blue. I never saw that color on anyone else. Until them." He swallowed hard. "We were supposed to have a son, but the fever came. I lost them both." He stared into the fire, the flames blurring. "This cabin. It was for them. After they were gone, it was just an empty box full of silence. Saying the words out loud was like cutting out a poison. It hurt, but it was a clean pain." Winona got up and sat on the hearth near him. She didn't touch him. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She just sat with him in his sorrow, her presence a solid, comforting anchor. "The silence is gone now," she said softly, after a long time. He looked at her strong, calm face in the firelight, and he knew she was right. The silence was gone. The tomb was a home again. It wasn't the one he had planned, but it was a home. A profound gratitude for this woman, for the children she had brought into his broken life, washed over him, so powerful it almost knocked him off his feet. But winter couldn't last forever. As the snow began to melt, a new kind of tension crept into the cabin. The world was coming back. Isaac knew that the town of Redemption was a full day's ride away. It was a hard place, full of suspicious men. He could only imagine what they would say about a white rancher living with an Indian woman and her 2 strange, blue-eyed children. But a more immediate threat was coming. One afternoon, Winona was staring out the door at the melting snow, and a shadow passed over her face. "They will come," she whispered. "Who?" Isaac asked, though he already knew. "My people. To see if the spirits have claimed us." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since that first night, he saw real fear in them. "There is a man, Kangi. He is a warrior who wanted me for his wife. I chose another, and he was shamed. When my husband died, Kangi tried again. I refused him, the birth of my children. He used it. He told the people they were a curse. He will want to be sure the curse has been erased from the earth." Isaac's hand went to the Winchester rifle hanging over the mantel. A cold, protective rage he hadn't felt in years settled over him. "This is your home now," he said, his voice low and hard as iron. "This is their home. No one will harm you here." The fear in her eyes was replaced by a look of gratitude that made his heart ache. But the threat remained. They were no longer fighting a storm. They were about to face the judgment of men, and Isaac knew that could be a far colder, more brutal force. It happened on a gray, grim day in early March. Isaac was splitting logs when he saw them. 4 riders on the hill to the east. They weren't cowboys. They were Lakota warriors, stark and menacing against the leaden sky. They rode with a grim purpose that made Isaac's blood run cold. He set down his axe, his movements calm and deliberate, and walked into the cabin. Winona was already at the window, her face bone white. She was clutching Wiyawi so tightly, the baby squirmed. "Stay inside. Lock the door," Isaac said, his voice tight. He took the Winchester from its pegs. The weight of it felt good in his hands, reassuring. "Isaac, no," Winona pleaded. "Don't shed blood for us." "I won't start it," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "But I will finish it." He gave her one hard look, a look that said everything he couldn't, and stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. He stood on the porch, rifle held loosely at his side, one man against four. But this was his land. This was his home. He would not give it up. The riders stopped a stone's throw from the cabin. The leader, a man with a face like a knotted fist, had to be Kongi. His eyes swept over Isaac with contempt, then fixed on the cabin door. "We have come for the woman," Kongi called out, his English flat and cold. "She carries a curse. She belongs to the spirits." "The woman is under my protection," Isaac replied, his voice steady. "She and her children are guests in my home." Kongi sneered. "The white man protects the stain in the blood. She does not belong here. She belongs to the earth." He wasn't talking about murder. He was talking about a righteous cleansing. "The only stain I see here is the hate in your heart," Isaac shot back, his knuckles white on the rifle stock. "Leaving a woman and her babies to die is a coward's act, not a warrior's." Kongi's face tightened with fury. He exchanged a look with his men. Their hands drifted towards their own weapons. The air crackled, stretched thin, ready to snap into violence. Just then, the cabin door creaked open. Winona stepped out. She was holding Chayton, wrapped tightly in furs. Her face was no longer pale with fear. It was set with a resolve that looked like it was carved from the rock of the earth itself. She walked to the edge of the porch and stood beside Isaac, a silent, unshakable declaration. "Kangi," she said, speaking in her own language. Her voice was clear and strong, filled with an authority that made the warriors sit up straighter. "I am not a curse," she declared, her eyes locked on his. "I am a mother. The spirits did not abandon me. They sent a protector. You speak of tradition, of pure blood. But what tradition says a mother and her babies should be left for the wolves? You followed a man blinded by pride. You let fear make you weak." She lifted Chayton. The cold air roused him, and he opened his eyes. Those brilliant, impossible blue eyes stared out, calm and unafraid. He looked right at Kangi. "My children will live," Winona said, her voice a fierce, low promise. "They will live because their mother is strong, and they will live because a man with a brave heart chose kindness over judgment. This is my home now. This is my family. I renounce the law that would have killed me. I renounce the judgment of men who have forgotten how to be human." A heavy silence fell. Kangi stared at her, his hard face a storm of confusion and anger. He had come to find a curse. Instead, he found a family. He had come to find a shamed outcast. Instead, he found a queen defending her throne. He hadn't lost to the white man's gun. He had been defeated by a woman's spirit. With a guttural cry of pure frustration, Kangi wrenched his horse around. He gave Winona one last look, a look of bitter, grudging respect. Then he dug his heels in and rode away, his men trailing behind him like ghosts. Isaac slowly lowered his rifle, the tension draining out of him. He looked at Winona. She was trembling slightly, but her head was high. He reached out and put his hand on her arm. "Winona," he started, but he had no words big enough for what he felt. She leaned into his touch for just a second, a silent thank you, then straightened her shoulders and carried her son back into the warmth of their home. The battle was over. They had won. That night by the fire, Isaac finally found the words he needed. "When I found you," he said quietly, "I was already dead. This house was a tomb. I was just a ghost haunting it." He looked around at the life that now filled every corner. You brought it all back. You and Chayton and Wiyawi. You filled the silence. Winona looked up from rocking the baby, a deep wisdom in her eyes. And you, Isaac Prescott, she said softly. You gave us a world when ours threw us away. I think we were all ghosts, and we brought each other back to life. Spring came in a sudden rush of green, and life settled into a new pattern, a quiet rhythm of shared work and joy. He taught her the ways of the ranch. She taught him the names of the prairie plants and how to just sit and be still. They were building a new world together, piece by piece. The twins grew from tiny infants into curious toddlers. Chayton, serious and solemn, followed Isaac everywhere, his little hand clutching Isaac's finger. Wiyawi, full of laughter, was her mother's shadow. One summer afternoon, Isaac stood on the porch, watching Winona show the children a butterfly in the meadow. Wiyawi was clapping, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Chayton was reaching out a tiny finger, his face a mask of concentration. Winona looked up and caught Isaac's eye. She gave him a radiant smile, a smile that reached right into his chest and healed the last of the old wounds. In that moment, he saw his future. It wasn't the life he had planned with Mary, but it was a life full of a love he never thought possible. He looked at his children. The word felt so right in his heart, and he saw their impossible blue eyes. He no longer saw the ghost of his dead wife. He saw Chayton's loyalty. He saw Wiyawi's joy. He saw the living proof that a life could be broken into a million pieces and still be rebuilt into something even more beautiful. The lonely cowboy who found a dying woman in a snowstorm hadn't just saved her. In saving them, he had finally saved himself. If you believe that kindness can build a home anywhere, even in the harshest of lands, then don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories that prove the human spirit can't be broken.